What is going on, everybody? It is the Icebreaker here. Thank you guys so much for stopping by for a brand new video. So now with the 2024 Stanley Cup playoffs officially under wraps, shout out to the Florida Panthers for winning their very first Stanley Cup. I thought it would be a great time to just get into off-season content right out the gate here, just a few nights after the Stanley Cup has been awarded. So I'm going to do a video that I did a couple years back. I know I skipped last off season, but this was a video that I had a lot of fun making. So for this video, I'm going to tell you guys 10 bold predictions, give you guys 10 bold predictions for the upcoming 2024-2025 NHL season. Now, before I get into these bold predictions, let me just preface that these are not meant to be like super realistic necessarily. Like in my mind, I feel like these do have a bit of a chance to happen. Some picks are bolder than others, obviously, some predictions, but yeah, don't get all like defensive, super up in arms in the comments section. These picks are meant to be bold, they're meant to be controversial, so like just take this with a grain of salt. I'm just doing this for fun, guys, okay? So kicking things off, my first bold prediction for the 2024-2025 NHL season, ripping the band-aid off right out of the gate. I am predicting the Tampa Bay Lightning to miss the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2025. Now, there's no question that Tampa Bay Lightning have been one of the most successful NHL franchises over the last decade or so, especially when you consider 2020 and 2021 winning back-to-back Stanley Cup championships, getting back to the finals once again in 2022. But since then, it's been a little bit of a regression period. 2023 losing a very close first round series to the Leafs, and then this past playoffs getting absolutely mauled by the Florida Panthers in just 5 games in that opening round. And for me, I don't necessarily view the Tampa Bay Lightning as a team that's going to be getting any better moving forward with the core that they currently have. In fact, I feel like there's many reasons to believe that this team is only going to continue to decline. So first and foremost, I look at the team on the offensive end, and I feel like they are going to regress a little bit. I look at their lineup, they're not as deep as they once were in those years where they were able to get to 3 straight finals and win 2 cups, obviously. Nikita Kucherov, who led the league in scoring, 144 points, just an all-world season. I just don't think it's really realistic to expect Nikita Kucherov to put up 140 plus points for the second year in a row. I just felt like a lot of the offensive output that some guys put up, it was kind of an outlier season in that regard. So I think his production should fall off quite a bit. And there's other factors on this team as well. When we're getting into like free agency here in the coming days, Steven Stamkos may not be back with the Lightning. The Lightning captain who's been there since 2008, right? He's been with the organization for so long. He's been their leader for so long. And for him to not be signed at this point kind of has me worried that maybe the Lightning are going to just let him walk, or he's going to decide that he just doesn't want to stay there because the contract negotiations haven't gone well, according to what we've heard in reports early on this season. You're losing 40 goals out of your lineup right there. So right there, that alone should make the offense that much worse. And then you look at even the rest of the roster, particularly Andrei Vasilevskiy, who, not too long ago was widely regarded as the best goaltender in the NHL. But these past couple of seasons, he hasn't really been anywhere close to that. Like, he still has his moments where he can show up and be a top goaltender in the league. Obviously, I'm not disrespecting Vasilevskiy. He's been a top goaltender for a reason, was a huge part in them winning the Cups, obviously. But he's not what he used to be, it seems like. Maybe the injury issues to his back played a role in that. But I still feel like maybe his game is declining a bit, and if that is the case, and if he can't return to peak Vasilevskiy form, that does not help the Lightning's chances to, getting back into the playoffs. It definitely hurts their chances as well. And also, I look at the Eastern Conference as a whole. I feel like the East, especially the Atlantic Division, is getting a lot tougher. I know that the last few years it's always been Toronto, Boston, Florida, Tampa. These 4 teams kind of always been battling out. We always knew who the top of the tower was in terms of the Atlantic Division, but you look at the rest of those divisional teams, Montreal's on the rise, Buffalo is getting a lot better, Ottawa just made a splash with Linus Ullmark. They should be a lot better next season. Detroit Red Wings nearly made the playoffs this past year. That division is not what it used to be. It's definitely a lot deeper, and Tampa Bay is definitely one of those teams that's getting a little bit older, getting up there in age, and certainly going to be declining in the years to come. And I think as soon as next season, it's not out of the realm of possibility that the Tampa Bay Lightning could find themselves on the outside looking in come April. Moving on now to my second bold prediction for the upcoming season. Macklin Celebrini, I believe, is not going to win the Calder Trophy. Now, Macklin Celebrini, without a doubt, is the top prospect in the upcoming 2024 NHL draft. It seems all but inevitable that Macklin Celebrini is going to be a member of the San Jose Sharks come training camp. And as an 18-year-old, I think he's going to come in and produce quite well, like most guys of his stature are capable of doing that early in their careers. But I look at him as a prospect. I just don't quite expect him to dominate coming out of the gate, especially when he's on a Sharks team where goals are basically become very hard to come by, considering that the Sharks, in all things considered, are still not a very good team. Now, having said that, Celebrini still has a very high ceiling to be among the better players in the NHL, but I don't necessarily view him as like a Crosby, McDavid, even Connor Bedard level type of prospect. I think what we should expect for his rookie season is to be kind of more like along the lines of like a Steven Stamkos, John Tavares, Jack Eichel. If you guys remember back when those guys had their rookie seasons, they had really strong rookie years, but they didn't necessarily dominate right out the gate like those other guys that I mentioned. Like Stamkos had like a 23-goal, 46-point rookie season. Tavares and Eichel each had over 50 points in the rookie year. Still really good for rookies, but he's not going to dominate the NHL as an 18-year-old. I just don't see that happening, especially on the Sharks team, right? But even with saying that, a 50-point season out of a rookie does give you a very solid chance at winning that Calder Trophy. But you look at the rookie class in this year's upcoming season, I feel like it's a lot deeper in most years. I highlighted a couple other guys, Lane Hudson from the Montreal Canadiens, just a top-end defenseman. I feel like he's going to be very productive for them. Logan Stankoven from the Dallas Stars, not technically a rookie, did not play enough regular season games for the Stars to burn that rookie year. I know he played some playoff games, but he's still eligible for that Calder Trophy. And even listing some other rookies here, Celebrini's potential teammate in San Jose, Will Smith, is going to be in the running for the Calder. Also, Cutter Gauthier from the Anaheim Ducks. And even the biggest wild card in Matvei Michkov, if the reports are indeed true that he's going to terminate that contract in the KHL and sign with the Philadelphia Flyers, he could be a guy that anyone could see easily completely dominating right out the gate and stealing the Calder Trophy from a guy like Celebrini. Now, this doesn't go without saying, I do believe that Celebrini should be the front runner to win the Calder Trophy, but just given all the names that I mentioned, it seems like he should have quite a bit of competition for that Calder Trophy, so I don't think by any means it's a lock that Celebrini could win it. So for that reason, I'm just going to go bold and say, you know what, maybe he doesn't win it. Maybe someone else steals it from him, but we'll see what happens. Celebrini's still going to be a great player. No doubt about it, regardless if he wins the Calder or not. San Jose has a bright future, and if they draft him, they're going to be getting themselves an elite talent for years to come. Moving on to my third bold prediction for the 2024-2025 NHL season. This has to do with the Pittsburgh Penguins here, and I believe that the Penguins are going to ship one or multiple core pieces at next year's trade deadline. Look, I know this one is super bold because I feel like their core players are kind of destined to be career Penguins, but I look at that Penguins roster, it's an older core now. The group as it is just isn't what it used to be. I don't really care for their supporting pieces. They aren't what they used to be back when those teams were contending and winning Stanley Cup championships in the mid-2010s. This, to me, is a declining team in a rising Eastern Conference. I think the Rangers are better. I think the Hurricanes are better. I think the Devils are potentially better next season. Like I mentioned, the Panthers are going to be there still. They just won the Cup. The Leafs are still going to be there. Ottawa's getting better. Buffalo, Detroit, all are getting better. So the Penguins are going to be in tough just to make the playoffs, and even when you look at the past couple of seasons, not quite having enough to get in. 91-point season back in 2022, missed the playoffs by 1 point, and then missing the postseason by 3 points this past season with 88. I don't know. I just have zero confidence that this Penguins team can possibly be getting any better than they already have been. So for that reason, I feel like they're still going to be in the playoff hunt. They're not a bad team by any means, right? But I still think at this point, I can see a scenario where maybe they're not looking too hot to make the playoffs for the third year in a row, and Kyle Dubas decides, you know what, I think we need to really start this rebuild, and we need to start selling huge, like selling some big pieces. I mean, we could throw in Erik Karlsson into the core as well, but I feel like his contract is going to be really hard to move. So one of Crosby, Malkin, Letang is kind of what I was thinking of as a bold prediction. One of those guys, at least one of those guys, gets moved at the deadline. I feel like Crosby is kind of safe. I feel like he's more of a career Penguin unless himself decides, you know what, I don't want to be here anymore. Then they can look into trading him. But between Letang and Malkin, let's say, if I had to pick one guy who I think it would be the most likely to get moved at the deadline, I'd probably go with Gino, Evgeny Malkin. Even though he's still a really good centerman, I don't think he's quite what he used to be. And I feel like there's still value out there for a guy like him who could fill anybody's middle six, second, or third line, even if it comes to that, on a Stanley Cup championship caliber team. So I feel like Evgeny Malkin could be a guy that maybe gets moved if things don't go well for the Penguins as a whole. But yeah, I'm just floating the idea that maybe the Penguins should decide to maybe move on from this core and really start the rebuild, because this team's not getting any better anytime soon, in my opinion, and they don't have the greatest prospect pool. So I really think that Kyle Dubas needs to get to work and start collecting some draft capital, some good young assets to really push this team into a new direction. Bold prediction number 4. Now this one could probably be proven to be wrong within the next like 48 hours, maybe the next week at most. But you know what? I'm just going to throw the idea out there. Maybe Zegras and Laine get traded for each other. Now this bold prediction is probably very unlikely to happen, even though these guys are probably both going to get traded at some point in the offseason. I think it's very unlikely that they get traded for each other, but I just think it would be a very interesting trade to explore. These are two players who need to find teams where their role would be more secure. For the Ducks, for example, they have a plethora of centers, and that's why Trevor Zegras is really no longer of use to them when they just drafted Leo Carlsson, and he looks like he's going to be a very, very good player for them. And they have Mason McTavish as well. They have a pretty solid 1-2 punch as it is. So Trevor Zegras kind of doesn't really fit in their long-term plans anymore, even though he's still very young. They don't really need him to lead that center group when they already have two other amazing centers who you could argue maybe have a better ceiling at this stage of their careers and are younger as well, right? So they have a plethora of centers. I think what they actually do need is some help on the wing, in particular goal scoring help, right? And Patrik Laine, his whole career has been defined as one of the better goal scorers in the NHL when healthy, of course. That's the asterisk, because Laine has obviously had some health issues the past couple of seasons, but when he's been healthy, he has been fairly productive. With Columbus, it was a very slippery slope, very up and down, career for him there in those 4 years. But in those middle parts of his career there, he had a very solid near point per game to point per game seasons, just couldn't play the full year. This past season only played, I believe, 18 games, had 6 goals, 9 points. So he struggled quite a bit, but I think a change of scenery is definitely going to help him on a team like Anaheim, who has basically no pressure, but they're still expected to take a step forward with their young core and improve. But Laine is exactly what that team needs. They need some goal scoring on the wing. He complements their top 6 well, in my opinion. I feel like he could. And for Columbus, even though this might not be as good of a fit as Laine would be with Anaheim, given that Columbus does have their own plethora of very young, talented centers, and they kind of have it set down the middle, I would say. I mean, Cole Sillinger's decent. They got Adam Fantilli, who's looking to be pretty solid. Kent Johnson can play either the wing or center. But I feel like Zegras could be another complementary piece to that team, because he could also play either center or wing. So there's just more viable options up front for the Blue Jackets, and especially for a market like Columbus. I think they just are in dire need of more superstar talent. But when you look at Trevor Zegras, who still has that potential to be a superstar caliber player, I think it's a welcomed addition for Columbus, especially, he could be a guy that can come in potentially like rejuvenating Johnny Gaudreau a little bit, who since coming over from Calgary has not quite been the same Johnny Gaudreau, not anywhere close, quite frankly. But I think, just adding another superstar to that team can definitely complement that young Blue Jackets core quite well, in my opinion. So I'm not saying this is a realistic, option for trade by any means, but I just feel like this could be kind of a solution to both of these teams' problems, just swapping young guys who just looking for changes of scenery. All right, so getting into bold prediction number 5, maybe a bold prediction depending on how you guys look at it, but this is about the Montreal Canadiens, and I think they're going to take a significant step forward this upcoming season, and I don't believe they are going to be considered the worst team in Canada any longer. You look at their young core, I feel like they're ready to take another step forward. Nick Suzuki had a career season. I believe he had, 77 points. He's on his way up to being one of the better centers in the NHL. Definitely solidified himself as, at the very least, a top-line center in the league. Cole Caulfield, career high in points. His goal scoring wasn't what we expected it to be, but still career high in points, and looks like he's on his way to being one of the better wingers in the league too. Yuri Slafkovsky, huge second year, 50 points, popped off in the second half of the season. The Habs have a complete top line now. Obviously, they brought in Alex Newhook, who when healthy was actually pretty solid for them. Joshua Wall was a complimentary piece too, looked really good as well. Kirby Dach, who missed basically the entire season last year, coming back. Hopefully he's fully healthy this year and can solidify that center depth, plug back himself into the number 2 center slot, and be productive like he was 2 years ago. This Habs team definitely looks like they have a bright future up front. On the blue line, they look like they're shoring up very quickly with prospects like Logan Mailloux, Lane Hudson, David Reinbacher. I don't know if he's going to be on the squad as soon as this upcoming season, but just to name a few, the blue line looks to be very solid, to have a bright future. Other young guys on the team, Arbor Xhekaj, Caden Gooley, and Mike Matheson, who had a career 60-plus point season this past year. Their defense looks a lot better than what it was. Even their goaltending, I feel like even short-term, it's not that bad. Like Sam Montembeault had himself a really solid year, all things considered. And then you have Caden Primo, who, was struggling a little bit, but since they traded Jake Allen, he looked a lot better, knowing that he had a definitive role on the team as Sam Montembeault's backup, and he's probably going to back him up once again this upcoming season. Both goalies still relatively young. I think Montembeault's only, 28, right? And Primo, he wasn't drafted that long ago. He might be 24, 25. This still pretty young goaltending tandem with some years left ahead of them in their careers, with a little bit more left to prove. And you can argue none of those guys have even entered their prime yet. So I just feel like overall that roster is slowly starting to come together, and I think they're going to gradually get better. I'm not saying they're a playoff team by any means, but I just look at other teams in Canada. There's a couple other teams that I feel like there is the argument to be made that Montreal might leapfrog them in the overall standings, let's just say. Now, I'm probably going to do some season predictions and divisional standings predictions before the season starts, so I don't want to spoil what teams I could see them being better than, but I'll kind of hint at it a little bit here just so I can get my point across. So there's one particular team in Canada that I feel like looks to be declining a little bit or transitioning into a retool phase, and I feel like they could be on their way down in the standings and maybe looking to rebuild potentially. So I could see a world where they are maybe the worst team in Canada this upcoming season and not Montreal anymore. And even there's this other team who kind of finished close with them in the standings. You probably know which one I'm talking about if you can look at the standings yourself. And that other team hasn't necessarily proven that they are that much further ahead in their rebuild, just in terms of what they've been able to accomplish. They still haven't really, taken any significant strides team-wise to get into a playoff spot finally. So it's kind of a toss-up. I don't know if they're the 5th best team in Canada or the 6th best team, but I definitely don't think they're the worst anymore. And that's the bold prediction here. I think Montreal is definitely on the rise, and they're not going to be as bad as people think. All right, bold prediction number 6. People might shut off the video here, but I don't really care. Probably the boldest one to date so far in this video, but I'm going to go with Elias Pettersson here as potentially leading the league in scoring this upcoming season. Now, I know a lot of people are probably going to laugh at this one. Elias Pettersson, really, he's coming off a pretty disappointing season. Second half of the year was pretty horrendous. His playoff numbers did not look good. It wasn't that productive. Didn't look that great out there. So yeah, I get it. This is obviously a bold take considering all the talent that the NHL has currently. There's a lot of players who have proven to be more productive than a guy like Elias Pettersson and are quite frankly better than Pettersson. I'm not saying that Pettersson's the best player in the league by any means, obviously. We all know that's Connor McDavid. Just look what he did in the playoffs this past year, right? But I don't think that a, fairly small sample size of poor play, all things considered, should define you as a player. And I feel like certain people might be writing Elias Pettersson off as an elite talent just because he struggled a bit down the stretch and in the postseason. But you look at what he did early on this season, I think through the first 15, 20, 25 games even, Pettersson was the league's leading scorer. Like, he had a really strong start to the year. And that's the Elias Pettersson that we all know. That's the Elias Pettersson that I would expect him to be throughout the whole season. He just needs to maintain his play. He needs to just stay consistent. We know he's done it in the past. A couple of years back, he had over 100 points. There's no reason to believe why he shouldn't get back there again. When you look at his numbers this past year, he finished with 89 points. And when you say that that's a disappointing year for Pettersson, that just goes to show how high this guy's ceiling is, right? So I definitely expect Pettersson to have a bounce back season. Now, saying he's going to lead the league in scoring might be bold, considering there's a guy named Connor McDavid, and Nathan MacKinnon, and Leon Draisaitl, and Nikita Kucherov. List goes on, right? David Pastrnak, Austin Matthews, of course. But I'm particularly high in the Canucks this next season. I really think they're going to make a big splash in free agency, and they're going to be one of the best offensive teams we've ever seen, quite frankly. I'm really high on the Canucks next year. And I just think we know that Pettersson is capable of playing at that high-end elite level, being one of the best players in the league. So I know to lead the league in scoring, at the very least, he'd have to put up 125 points. Maybe that's obviously a lot to ask. I think it probably is. But look, I still like Pettersson. I think he's a talented player. And I just want to be bold with it. I want to pick somebody else. I hate that it's always the same guys kind of, leading the league in scoring. As much as I love Connor McDavid and he's an amazing freaking player, we need to give that Art Ross to somebody else. Somebody else just needs to pop off, not named Kucherov or McKinnon. And you know what? I'm just going to throw Elias Pettersson's name out there. Bold prediction, I know, considering how bad he was down the stretch. But you know what? I like the Canucks as a team overall. I think on paper, they're looking to pop off offensively this next year, and Elias Pettersson certainly is going to be a big part of that. Bold prediction number 7. This is probably fairly bold considering that this team just made the playoffs this past year, but I think the Washington Capitals are going to take a massive nosedive down the standings and finish the 2024-2025 regular season with the worst record in the Eastern Conference. And my reasonings for this are fairly simple. For one, this is a veteran team, much older now, not getting any better. Offensively, they were not very good whatsoever despite making the playoffs. Alex Ovechkin, for one, took a huge step back in what has been a fantastic career, but he has not looked anywhere close to what he had been in years past. This past season was quite a bit of a struggle. I know first half of the year he was not scoring goals at all. Now he did kick it up a notch in the second half of the season, but overall I still think Ovechkin's play is only going to continue to decline as he enters his 40s now. I think he's like 38 now, so he's just not the player he once was. That much was clear this past season. And also looking at their goaltending, I viewed it to be somewhat fluky. Now, Darcy Kemper did not have a great season by any means, and they shipped him off 1-for-1 for Pierre-Luc Dubois. We'll get into that in a second. But as for Charlie Lindgren, is he a reliable 1A now that Kemper is gone? I don't think so. Not saying that Lindgren's a bad goalie, but I'm not fully sold on him as a full-time starter. And, he had some good moments, but I don't necessarily think he is the guy that's going to get the Capitals over the hump. Even when you look at that short 4-game series against the Rangers, I didn't think he looked particularly great. That's just my opinion, though, but he left in quite a bit of some questionable goals, let's just say that. And in terms of Pierre-Luc Dubois, who they got in that 1-for-1 trade for Kemper, look, he came off a really disappointing season with the Kings, only put up 40 points, right? Just wasn't a fit there. I don't know what the issue was because the Kings have a ton of depth, and he was just pushed down the lineup. He's just not as good of a player as Philip Deneau or Anze Kopitar at this stage of their careers. But even when Dubois is playing at his highest, at best, he's just a solid number 2 center, a guy who could put up about 60 points, but he isn't someone who is viewed as a difference maker for any franchise. So I don't think he's going to be the guy that's going to necessarily take this team to the next level and make them a juggernaut offensive team like they certainly weren't this past season. I believe they were a bottom 5 offensive team, so they really struggled in that regard, and I don't think Dubois makes them any better, in my opinion. I just don't really have a lot of confidence in their core at this stage of their careers. Ovechkin's old, like I mentioned. John Carlson's a veteran, even though he can still produce. TJ Oshie's not what he used to be. Neither is Tom Wilson. Yeah, Dylan Strome is solid. He can get you 50, 55, 60 points maybe. Dubois at his best maybe has a bounce back and, is among the team leaders in scoring, not the league leaders in scoring, the team leader in scoring. He could definitely bounce back and be back to that 60-point player that he was as a second line center. But yeah, I still don't view this team as that great. They kind of had a lot of good fortune last year, won a lot of close games despite not really dominating in any category whatsoever, including the fact, like I mentioned, they were a bottom five offensive team and still somehow made the playoffs. I just think people are going to be in for a surprise how much of a dive they will take down the standings. It just seems inevitable just given how old this core is. And yeah, I don't think they're getting any better at this point. So I'm going bold here. It's rebuilding time in DC. Now, you thought the Pedersen prediction was bold. Coming in at my 8th bold prediction here. This one's borderline insane, but I just want to talk about it. Just imagine this happens, right? So I'm totally riding the narrative here. But, seeing that this is likely, well, it seems like it's confirmed. Marc-Andre Fleury did say that this would be his last NHL season before he calls it a career. I think it would just be a phenomenal story, and I'm going to call it as a bold prediction that he has one of his better seasons of his career. He gets the Minnesota Wild back into the playoffs, and not only that, but the Wild, they got a little magic going, and they go on a deep playoff run. How insane would that be, right? First of all, when you look at the Western Conference as a whole, I feel like it's really lopsided. You have your haves and your have-nots. And there's a couple of tweener teams that you could say maybe can sneak into the playoffs, but we're not 100% sure where they stand in the West. I'm thinking of the St. Louis Blues, the Nashville Predators, I guess the Utah Hockey Club now they're going to call it. Seattle Kraken's kind of in that discussion too, in my opinion. And then there's the Minnesota Wild, who had a bit of a disappointing season, but a lot of things just didn't go right. I still think on paper they have a really solid core. Offensively, they have a lot of great talent there. Kirill Kaprizov obviously being obvious one there. Matt Boldy looks like he's going to have a really good career, be one of the better players on that team, and definitely still has elite potential if I'm being honest. But looking at other guys, even like their defense, I still feel like is pretty solid. Brock Faber had a great rookie season. Jared Spurgeon was hurt all year. I expect him to be back, and I think he's definitely going to improve that defense. And as a result, I think the goaltending was just so bad. I just don't expect the goaltending to be nearly as bad as it was last year with Philip Gustafsson and Marc-Andre Fleury as that tandem. I think they should both bounce back, quite frankly, and I think the Minnesota Wild, at the very least, definitely have that potential to at least sneak back into the postseason. Because to me, the West, there's at least one, maybe two spots in the West where, the playoff spots are kind of up for grabs. It's kind of wide open a bit, and I think Minnesota has the potential to grab one of those spots. So I think they could definitely bounce back and make the playoffs. But in terms of their deep playoff run, I'm just riding with the narrative. I really love Marc-Andre Fleury, one of my favorite goalies to watch. I really enjoyed watching his career. And I think it just would be a great story, in his last season, puts together a really solid year, helps the Wild get into the playoffs, and maybe a little magic happens, I do kind of like this Minnesota team, and I think they have the potential to maybe be a sneaky threat. So, if Fleury does show up and just gives it all he can in his final season, and Fleury can get enough support from his Minnesota Wild forward group, I think Minnesota has the ability to maybe be a little bit better than people think. We're getting too far ahead of ourselves here. It's a bold prediction, but I'm riding the narrative. Marc-Andre Fleury has a great season, and Minnesota goes far. We'll see what happens, though. Similarly, in the Eastern Conference, bold prediction number 9. This is about the Buffalo Sabres. And this one maybe isn't so bold because I think this Sabres team is just loaded and they have such a bright future. But I think next season they bounce back. They get back to where they were 2 years ago. But this time they go over that playoff line. They finally end that playoff drought. Haven't made the playoffs since 2011. And not only that, I could see them winning a playoff series. I just really like the team in Buffalo. I really like what the Sabres are brewing right now. They're a team that's hungry. They were not happy with the season this past year. It was very disappointing to see a lot of the guys regress. It just was a disaster season as far as I'm concerned. But I think they're hungry. Last year was just a setback. I think the pieces are there for them to finally get into the playoffs. Certain players like Tage Thompson, Alex Tuck, Jeff Skinner, not Nick Cousins, Dylan Cousins didn't have the greatest seasons comparatively to the previous year where they were one of the best offensive teams in the league. I did expect that offense to come falling back down to earth slightly, but not quite to the rate that it did this past year. They might not peak at the level they did 2 years ago, but it's not going to be as bad as last year. So somewhere in between. A lot of those guys, I still feel like they're roughly point per game-ish type of players, especially Tage Thompson. I still feel like he's a superstar who just had a bit of a tough season, and I think he should return to form and be a 40-plus goal scorer, 90-plus point player. You look at the other young guys, Zach Benson coming into his own. Not a bad rookie season, but I think his second year is going to be much better. Jack Quinn coming back from injury, I think he should definitely help. JJ Peterka kind of broke out last year as well as one of the few bright spots on that Sabres team. So they have a ton of young talent and other guys that might make the lineup. Matt Savoy, Yuri Kulish, maybe. Just a lot of young talent up front, and I think the Sabres are definitely poised to take a step forward. Even their blue line, adding Bowen Byram, I think was an underrated get for them to complement the young studs they have on the back end in Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power. And even in goal, I know Devon Levi didn't have the greatest rookie season, but I think he's only going to get better as he continues to develop. But Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, shout out to him. He was a very surprising player, especially down the stretch. He was playing some of the best hockey of any goaltender really down the stretch, and definitely his best hockey of his career in the NHL at least. So the goaltending looks to be kind of coming together as well. The whole team as a whole, I just definitely think moving in the right direction. And I think as soon as next season, they should at the very least get into the playoffs finally. And depending who they face, I could see them winning a playoff series. Maybe if they face the Leafs, they could probably beat them just because the Leafs can never win the playoffs. But yeah, we'll just go bold because I think just picking the Sabres to make the playoffs isn't that bold. I feel like a lot of people are expecting them to take that step forward. So for this to be a bold prediction, I got to go the extra mile. I'm going to say they win a playoff series no matter who they face in the first round and get to the second round and show that the Sabres have one of, if not the brightest futures in the NHL. And for my 10th and final bold prediction of this video, maybe this isn't the boldest of picks, but I felt like for the last prediction, I had to predict a Stanley Cup champion. So I'm going to say that the Colorado Avalanche return to glory and hoist their second Stanley Cup in 4 seasons. I know it's been a pretty disappointing last couple of years for this Colorado Avalanche team with the elite talent that they have. 2023, they lost in the first round to the wild card Seattle Kraken, who ended up winning their first ever playoff series in their franchise's history. And then last season, getting to the second round after blowing out the Winnipeg Jets, but then losing to the Dallas Stars in the second round in 6 games. So the Avs have not been able to really come close to a Stanley Cup since 2022. But I feel like with the core that they have, it's still an elite core. You got Nathan MacKinnon, who's a top 3 player in the NHL, no doubt. Mikko Rantanen, who's a 100-plus point player at his best. Cale Makar, arguably, maybe even unarguably, the greatest defenseman in the NHL, the best defenseman in the NHL. Honestly, might go down as one of the greatest defensemen of all time. And honestly, I kind of like their depth and their supporting cast, even though it doesn't necessarily light the world on fire. I just feel like there are a bunch of guys on that team that kind of know their role and know how to contribute in many ways, not just on offense, but even on the defensive end as well, to complement their elite talent that they have. I just think they have the makeup of an all-around very good, great team. And their goaltending doesn't even need to be that good. And we saw that in the past with the Avs when they won in 2022. Darcy Kemper was their starter at that point, and he wasn't really particularly that great. He wasn't even really solid for them, but he got you the saves when he needed to, especially in that Stanley Cup final. I believe that was his best series in that 2022 playoff run. Avs fans can correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like that was his best series, to clinch that cup for them. So getting back to this current roster, when you look at their starter right now in Alexander Georgiev, he has his moments where he's brilliant and other moments where he looks like one of the worst starters in the league. So I don't expect him to be a world beater and one of the best goalies ever, but he doesn't need to be amazing for this Avs team to still end up winning the cup. So I could see a similar fate happening there if the team can eventually get back and win a Stanley Cup. But especially just with the core that they have, like I mentioned before, Gabriel Landeskog, who potentially could be returning at some point in the 2024-2025 season. I just can't foresee Colorado not winning at least 1 or 2 more championships with the core that they currently have in place. In my opinion, they're just too good to settle for just one championship, and I definitely think they're capable of achieving even greater heights. A lot of people have been saying that this team has dynasty potential, and although it's going to be very difficult to do, especially in today's NHL, it's not out of the realm of possibility, again, given the amazing core that they have. So this may or may not be a bold prediction, but I'm just going to say it for the sake of the video, predicting a championship. I'm going with the Avs next season to claim the 2025 Stanley Cup. So with that, that is going to wrap up this video of my 10 bold predictions for the 2024-2025 NHL season. Keep in mind, again, these are bold predictions. I'm not saying these are going to happen, but I just wanted to kind of get it out there for the sake of just having a little fun, getting a little bit controversial. Feel free to let me know your opinions in the comments section. What are some of your bold predictions for the upcoming season? Do you agree with mine? Do you disagree with mine? Love or hate, it's all good. You can also give me some suggestions on what other type of NHL content you guys would like me to do in the future. So yeah, that's going to wrap up this video. Thank you guys so much for watching.